March 15, 1963. Vincent Torino had been Sam Giancana's right hand for 8 years, the man who slept outside his door, who tasted his food first, who would die before letting anyone harm the boss. That's exactly why it destroyed him to put 3 bullets in his own brother's chest. Mickey had walked into the Copa that night carrying a bottle of Giancana's favorite bourbon. He'd been hired as the new bartender just that week. What Vinny didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Mickey wasn't there to serve drinks. 200 witnesses watched Vinny draw his gun, watched him fire without hesitation, watched his brother fall. The sound of Mickey's last breath hitting the floor became the soundtrack to 30 years of guilt. Because sometimes the person you save isn't worth the person you sacrifice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The echo of those gunshots never really faded from the Copa's walls, even after they tore the place down in '78. Vinny could still hear them sometimes, late at night when the rusty anchor was empty except for the ghosts of broken dreams and watered-down whiskey. March 15, 1963. The Ides of March should have been a warning. The blood had pooled beneath Mickey's body like spilled wine, dark and spreading across the Copa's checkered floor. Vinny remembered how his brother's eyes had gone wide, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like relief, like he'd been carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders, and death was just setting it down. "Clean this up," Giancana had said, straightening his tie as if nothing had happened, as if Vinny hadn't just murdered his own flesh and blood to keep some 2-bit poison out of the boss's bourbon. "And make sure everyone knows what happens to rats in my house." But Mickey hadn't been a rat. That was the thing that ate at Vinny's gut like acid for 30 years. His brother had been trying to save him, and Vinny had been too goddamn loyal to see it. The bottle Mickey had been carrying, Maker's Mark, Giancana's favorite, had shattered when he fell. The amber liquid mixed with his blood, creating a cocktail that would haunt Vinny's dreams. Later, when the cops came sniffing around, they found traces of ricin in the glass shards. Enough to kill a horse, let alone a Chicago mob boss. But the poison hadn't been meant for Giancana. It had been meant for Vinny. Mickey had discovered the plot 3 days before he died. Someone in the outfit wanted Vinny gone. Maybe they thought he knew too much. Maybe they needed a scapegoat for some federal heat that was coming down. Either way, the plan was simple. Hire Mickey as a bartender, have him serve Vinny a drink laced with ricin, and let Big Brother die thinking Little Brother was just being generous. What the plotters hadn't counted on was Mickey's conscience, or his love for the brother who'd raised him after their old man drank himself to death in a Cicero gutter. Mickey had come to the Copa that night to warn Vinny, not to kill him. But when you're Sam Giancana's bodyguard and your job is to see threats everywhere, a brother carrying a suspicious bottle looks the same as any other assassin. The sound of breaking glass had triggered Vinny's reflexes before his brain could catch up. Training took over, muscle memory. 3 shots, center mass, just like they taught him in Korea before the outfit recruited him out of a Veterans Affairs meeting. By the time Vinny realized what he'd done, Mickey was already gone. No last words, no explanation. Just the slow leak of life onto a nightclub floor, while Dean Martin crooned from the jukebox about love and loss and all the space between. Giancana had been pleased. Vinny had proven his loyalty beyond question. There would be no more tests, no more proving himself. He was family now, blood in and blood out. Except the blood that bought his place at Giancana's table belonged to the only family that had ever mattered. The witnesses, all 200 of them, kept their mouths shut. Fear was a powerful motivator in those days, and nobody wanted to cross Sam Giancana over a dead bartender. But Vinny knew they remembered. He could see it in their eyes whenever he walked into a room. There goes the man who killed his own brother without blinking. What they didn't see was how his hands shook every time he heard glass break, how he started taking his bourbon neat because ice cubes reminded him of the sound Mickey's body made hitting the floor, how he stopped sleeping more than 2 hours at a time because every dream ended the same way, with his brother's blood on his hands and the taste of betrayal in his mouth. The truth about Mickey's real mission, about the ricin, about who really wanted Vinny dead, all of that stayed buried with his brother in Holy Cross Cemetery. Vinny attended the funeral alone. No flowers, no tears, just the weight of knowledge. that felt heavier than the gun in his shoulder holster. Giancana had patted his back afterward, told him it got easier with time. "Family business ain't for the weak," he'd said. "You did what needed doing." But it hadn't gotten easier. If anything, it got harder as the years passed and the truth started coming together piece by piece. Phone calls between made men that stopped when Vinny walked into the room, meetings he wasn't invited to. The slow realization that his brother's death had been orchestrated not just to test his loyalty, but to eliminate a witness to something bigger, something that would eventually get Giancana himself killed in 1975, shot in the back of the head while cooking Italian sausages in his Oak Park kitchen. The same something that was now, 30 years later, working its way through the last surviving witnesses from that night at the Copa, and Vinny was running out of people to protect. What questions are burning in your mind right now? Drop them in the comments. I love hearing your theories. And if you're hooked on Vinny's story, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we're diving deep into the aftermath that shaped 3 decades of guilt. The rusty anchor smelled like everything Vinny had tried to forget. Stale cigarettes, spilled beer, and the kind of regret that seeped into wood grain over decades. But it was his now, had been for 28 years, and in the amber light of the bar's neon signs, he'd built something that almost looked like a life. The morning sun filtered through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since the Carter administration, casting long shadows across empty tables where regulars would gather in a few hours to nurse their demons with whiskey chasers. Vinny moved through his routine with the precision of a man who'd learned that keeping busy was the only thing standing between sanity and the abyss. Coffee first, always black, always in the same chipped mug Mickey had given him for his 35th birthday. The ceramic was worn smooth where Vinny's thumb rested, a small comfort he couldn't bring himself to abandon even though it reminded him of everything he'd lost. The morning inventory was sacred ritual. Count the bottles, check the taps, arrange the glasses in perfect rows behind the bar. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over while his mind wandered to places it shouldn't go. 3 bottles of Maker's Mark on the top shelf, untouched for months because some ghosts were too heavy to pour. Sofia Martinez pushed through the back door at exactly 8:15, same as she had every morning for the past 7 years. 19 when she'd started, a single mother with fire in her eyes and nowhere else to go. Now 26, studying for her nursing degree on breaks, she'd become the closest thing to family Vinny allowed himself. "Morning, Vin." She tied her apron with practiced efficiency, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger than her years. "You sleep at all last night?" Enough. It was a lie, and they both knew it. The circles under his eyes had their own geography now, mapped by 30 years of broken sleep and guilty dreams. Sofia moved around the bar like she belonged there, checking supplies, wiping down surfaces that didn't need wiping. She hummed sometimes while she worked, old Spanish lullabies her grandmother had taught her, and the sound filled spaces in Vinny's chest he hadn't realized were empty. "Table 6 has got a wobbly leg again," she said, not looking at him. "Maybe we should call Tony Carpelli, have him take a look." Vinny's hands stilled on the bottle he'd been arranging. Tony Carpelli, one of the last witnesses from the Copa, now running a handyman business out of Bridgeport. In the old days, Tony had been a small-time bookie who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. These days, he fixed broken tables and leaky faucets, keeping his head down and his mouth shut. "I'll handle it," Vinny said. Sofia finally looked at him, brown eyes too, knowing for someone who'd never killed anybody. "You always say that. When's the last time you let someone else handle anything?" Before he could answer, the bell above the front door chimed. Too early for regulars, too late for the morning coffee crowd. Vinny's hand moved instinctively toward his waist, where A38 had rested for 30 years. Old habits. An elderly man shuffled in, using a walker that scraped against the worn linoleum. Vinny didn't recognize him at first. Age had a way of erasing the sharp edges that made men dangerous. But something about the way he moved triggered memories that lived in Vinny's bones. "We're not open yet," Sofia called out, but Vinny was already moving around the bar. "It's okay." His voice carried authority he rarely used anymore. "Mr. Delacroix and I have business to discuss." Henri Delacroix, another ghost from the Copa, back when he'd been Sam Giancana's accountant and keeper of secrets that could topple governments. Now he looked like what he was, a dying old man with liver spots and trembling hands. Vincent. Henri's accent still carried traces of New Orleans, though he'd lived in Chicago for 50 years. I was hoping we could talk. Sophia glanced between them, picking up on the tension that had shifted the room's atmosphere like a coming storm. She'd learned to read Vinny's moods, knew when to ask questions and when to disappear. "I'll be in the back," she said, but her eyes lingered on Vinny with concern that made his chest tight. "Call if you need anything." After she was gone, Henry lowered himself onto a bar stool with the careful movements of a man whose bones had turned to glass. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "They're all dead, Vincent. Jimmy Torello last week. Heart attack, they said. Paul Benedetto 3 months ago. Car accident." Henri looked up, and his eyes held the same fear Vinny had been carrying for 30 years. "I don't think we have much time left." The sound of Sophia dropping something in the back room, just a spoon against tile, made Vinny's hands shake. Some echoes never faded. Vinny gripped the edge of the bar, knuckles white against worn wood. "Who else knows you're here?" "Nobody." Henri's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Who would I tell? My wife's been dead 6 years. Kids moved to Phoenix. Haven't spoken to me since they found out about the old days." He fumbled in his coat pocket with shaking fingers. "But someone knows, Vincent. Someone's been watching my apartment. Black sedan, different plates every time." The familiar weight of paranoia settled on Vinny's shoulders like an old coat. 30 years of looking over his shoulder. 30 years of checking locks twice. 30 years of sleeping with one eye open. He'd thought it was over when Giancana died. Thought the secrets had been buried with the man who'd made them necessary. "What do you want, Henri?" Instead of answering, the old accountant pulled a manila envelope from his coat. The paper was yellowed, edges soft with age. He placed it on the bar between them with the reverence of a man handling explosives. Federal Bureau of Investigation was stamped across the top in faded red letters. Below that, a date that made Vinny's blood turn cold, March 10th, 1963, 5 days before Mickey died. "Declassified last month," Henri whispered. "Freedom of Information Act request. Took a journalist in Milwaukee 3 years to get these files released." His fingers traced the envelope's edge. "Your brother's name is all over them, Vincent." The room tilted. Vinny reached for his coffee mug, needed something solid to anchor him, but his hands were shaking too badly to lift it. "Mickey was never—" "Michael Anthony Torino, FBI asset 247 CH. Henri's voice cut through Vinny's denial like a blade. "Recruited in January 1963. Code name, Bartender." The words hit Vinny like physical blows. Each syllable rewrote 30 years of guilt, 30 years of believing he'd killed his brother to protect a piece of shit who'd ended up dead in his own kitchen anyway. He'd spent 3 decades carrying the weight of fratricide, and now this dying old man was telling him Mickey had been a federal agent all along. That's not possible. But even as he said it, Vinny was remembering things. The way Mickey had started asking questions about the family business, the new clothes, the car he couldn't afford on a bartender's salary. The phone calls that stopped when Vinny walked into the room. Henri opened the envelope with the careful precision of a surgeon. Inside were photocopied documents, surveillance photos, handwritten reports in Mickey's careful script. The top page was a memo dated March 12, 1963, 3 days before the shooting. Asset reports discovery of plot against subject the 5th Torino, Vincent, age 38, bodyguard to Samuel Giancana. Ricin poisoning planned for March 15th. Asset will attempt extraction of subject the 5th during scheduled meeting at Copa nightclub. Recommend immediate backup. Backup that never came. Vinny's legs gave out. He sank onto the stool across from Henri, staring at his brother's handwriting. Mickey had known about the ricin, had known someone in the outfit wanted Vinny dead, had been trying to save him, not kill him. "There's more." Henri's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Your brother wasn't just trying to warn you about the poison. He'd discovered something else. Something about Giancana's connection to—" The front door chimed again. Both men looked up, and Vinny felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. A woman stood in the doorway, maybe 40, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her coat was too expensive for the neighborhood, her shoes too clean. When she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Torino? Vincent Torino?" Her voice carried the flat vowels of somewhere far from Chicago. "My name is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. I believe Mr. Delacroix has something that belongs to us." Henri's face went gray. His hands scrambled to gather the documents, but Agent Chen was already moving, crossing the room with the predatory grace of someone who'd been hunting much longer than she'd been alive. "Those files were legally declassified," Henri stammered. "The ones you requested, yes. But the supplementary documents," she gestured toward the envelope, "those contain information relevant to an ongoing investigation." Vinny's mind raced. An ongoing investigation, 30 years later, and they were still chasing shadows from the Copa, which meant Mickey's death hadn't ended anything. It had just been the first domino in a line that was still falling. "What investigation?" he asked. Agent Chen's smile widened, and this time it held genuine warmth. The kind of warmth a cat showed a mouse. "The one into who really ordered your brother's murder, Mr. Torino. And why they're killing witnesses now to keep the truth buried." Outside, a car door slammed. Then another. Vinny realized they weren't getting out of this bar the same people who'd walked in. The sound of car doors slamming cut through Vinny like broken glass. His hand moved toward his waist, old instincts dying hard. But Agent Chen's eyes tracked the motion with the cold precision of someone who'd been expecting it. "I wouldn't." Her voice remained conversational, but something had shifted in her posture. The predator was done pretending to be domesticated. Henri's breathing had turned ragged, each exhale a small whimper of fear. The manila envelope lay open between them like an accusation, Mickey's handwriting visible from across the bar. 30 years of buried truth, and now federal agents were closing in like vultures on roadkill. "This is insane," Vinny said, but his voice cracked on the words. "Mickey's been dead for 3 decades. Whatever investigation you think—" "Oh, but that's where you're wrong, Mr. Torino." Chen moved closer, her shoes clicking against the worn linoleum with metronomic precision. "Your brother's death was just the beginning. The real question is who gave the order and why they're still cleaning house." Through the front window, Vinny could see dark shapes moving around his bar. At least 3 men, maybe 4, positioning themselves at exits he'd never thought about in civilian terms, but had automatically cataloged the day he'd bought this place. Old training never really died. It just went dormant until someone woke it up with the wrong kind of attention. Henri was folding like a house of cards, his liver-spotted hands clutching the bar's edge for support. "I just wanted to know the truth about that night. Jimmy and Paul were my friends." "Your friends were loose ends," Chen interrupted. "And loose ends have a way of unraveling everything if you don't tie them off properly." The back door. Sophia was still in the back, probably hearing every word through walls that were thinner than they looked. Vinny's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Get her out somehow. The alley behind the bar connected to 3 different streets, if she could reach her car. "You're thinking about the girl," Chen observed, and Vinny's blood turned to ice water. "Sophia Martinez, 26, nursing student at Chicago Community College, lives at 1247 West Division with her 6-year-old daughter, Emma." The casual recitation of details hit Vinny like physical blows. They'd done their homework. They knew about Sophia, knew about Emma, probably knew about every conversation Vinny had shared with the closest thing to family he'd allowed himself since Mickey died. "She's got nothing to do with this. Nobody has nothing to do with this, Mr. Torino. That's what your brother discovered before you put 3 bullets in his chest." Henri made a sound like a wounded animal. His face had gone the color of old newspaper, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. "Vincent, I'm sorry. I thought if we knew the truth, maybe it would finally be over." But Vinny was remembering other things now. The pattern Sophia had mentioned about Tony Carpelli, how she'd suggested calling him to fix the wobbly table. A suggestion that had seemed natural at the time, but now felt like a test, like someone had been coaching her on what to say. The bell above the front door chimed again, and Tony Carpelli walked in like he belonged there. 63 now, gray at the temples, but still carrying himself with the careful balance of a man who'd survived dangerous times by knowing when to duck. He nodded at Chen like they were old friends. "Tony," Vinny breathed, and felt the last piece of his world crumble. "Sorry, Vin." Tony's voice carried genuine regret, but not enough to stop him from crossing the room. They got pictures of me and Linda's granddaughter walking to school. What was I supposed to do? Agent Chen smiled with satisfaction. Mr. Carpelli has been very helpful in arranging this meeting. It's amazing how cooperative people become when you explain the alternatives. The back room had gone silent. No more sounds of Sophia working, no humming, no casual noise of someone who didn't know her boss was about to disappear forever. Either she'd slipped out the back, which meant she was smarter than Vinny had given her credit for, or she was listening to every word and trying to decide whether to run or call for help. Neither option would save her if these people wanted her gone. Vinny's mouth tasted like copper and old lies. What do you want? The rest of the files, Chen said simply. The ones your brother hid before you killed him. The ones that detail exactly who in the federal government was working with Giancana and why they needed Mickey silenced. Henri was shaking his head, denial written in every trembling gesture. There weren't any other files. These are everything. These are decoys. Chen cut him off. Your brother was smarter than that. He wouldn't have risked his life on evidence this thin. Outside, more car doors slammed. Vinny realized the killing was about to start, and 30 years of running had finally caught up with him. Vinny's eyes darted to the back room where Sophia had disappeared, calculating distances and angles with instincts he'd spent 30 years trying to bury. 3 steps to the bar, another 4 to the kitchen door. If he moved fast enough. She's already gone, Chen said, reading his thoughts with the practiced ease of someone who'd orchestrated this dance before. My people escorted her out the back 10 minutes ago. Don't worry, as long as you cooperate, she'll be home in time to pick up Emma from school. The casual mention of Sophia's daughter hit Vinny like a physical blow. These people didn't just know about his life, they'd been watching it, cataloging every connection, every weakness. Every person he'd foolishly allowed himself to care about had become ammunition against him. Henri's breathing was getting worse, each inhale a desperate wheeze. His face had gone beyond gray into something approaching translucent, as if fear was literally draining the life from his body. Vincent, tell them. Whatever Mickey hid, just tell them. I can't. My heart can't. Your heart's the least of your problems, Chen said without looking at the dying accountant. Her attention remained fixed on Vinny with the intensity of a surgeon preparing to cut. Your brother was gathering evidence of a conspiracy that went all the way to Washington. CIA connections, Cuban exile funding, plans that would have made the Bay of Pigs look like a church picnic. Vinny felt the familiar taste of copper flooding his mouth, the flavor of adrenaline and old terror. Mickey never said anything about the CIA. Because he was protecting you. The same way you thought you were protecting Giancana when you pulled that trigger. Chen moved closer, close enough that Vinny could smell her perfume mixed with gun oil and something else. The metallic scent of violence carefully held in check, but Mickey wasn't trying to poison anyone that night. He was trying to get you out before the real killers arrived. The words rewrote everything Vinny thought he knew about March 15th, 1963. He closed his eyes and was back in the Copa's dim light, watching Mickey approach Giancana's table with a drink that never reached its destination. The sound of breaking glass, Mickey stumbling, the tumbler falling, liquid splashing across expensive shoes, and then Mickey's eyes wide with something that hadn't been guilt or fear but desperation. The desperation of a man running out of time to save the only person who mattered. The glass, Vinny whispered. He dropped it on purpose, creating a distraction, giving you a chance to leave with him. But you didn't understand, did you? You saw your brother near your boss with what looked like poison, and 30 years of conditioning took over. Chen's voice carried a note of something that might have been sympathy if it hadn't been so calculating. You shot the one person trying to save your life. Tony Carpelli had been shifting nervously by the door, but now he spoke up with the desperate enthusiasm of a man trying to prove his usefulness. The files, Mickey gave them to you that morning, remember? That package he said was insurance? The memory hit like a sledgehammer. Mickey showing up at Vinny's apartment before dawn, nervous energy crackling around him like electricity. A manila envelope, thick with documents Vinny had never bothered to examine. Mickey pressing it into his hands, making him promise to keep it safe. making him promise to open it if anything happened. Vinny had thrown the envelope into his bedroom closet and forgotten about it until 3 weeks after the funeral, when grief had finally loosened its stranglehold enough for him to think about practical things like Mickey's apartment, his belongings, the small details that death left scattered in its wake. By then, the envelope was gone. "I don't know what happened to it," he said, and realized Chen was smiling again. "But you remember it now. And you remember where you lived when Mickey gave it to you. 1247 North Cleveland, apartment 3B. Lovely building. They're turning it into condos next month." She pulled out her phone, checked the time with theatrical precision. "My people are already there with the demolition crew. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look." Henry made a sound like air escaping from a punctured tire. His face had gone beyond pale into something approaching blue, and his hand clutched at his chest with increasing desperation. "Vincent, please." "You want to know the real tragedy?" Chen continued, ignoring Henri's distress with practiced indifference. "Your brother didn't just die for nothing. He died protecting secrets that could have prevented everything that came after. Dallas, Memphis, Los Angeles. A whole cascade of bullets and blood that might have been stopped if Mickey Torino's evidence had seen daylight." The weight of that revelation crashed over Vinny like a collapsing building. Not just his brother's death on his conscience, but decades of history that might have been different. How many other lives had ended because he'd pulled that trigger in a moment of misguided loyalty? Outside, the sound of engines starting up. Chen glanced toward the window with satisfaction. "Time's up, Mr. Torino. My team has what they came for. The question now is whether you're still useful enough to keep breathing." Henri Delacroix pitched forward off his stool, hitting the floor with the wet sound of meat slapping concrete. His eyes were still open, but they saw nothing now. Vinny understood that the killing had finally begun, and he was next. Vinny knelt beside Henri's body, pressing his fingers against the old man's neck for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. The skin was already cooling, and Henri's eyes stared at nothing with the glassy emptiness of a man who died knowing too much. "Heart attack," Chen observed with clinical detachment. "Stress will do that to a man his age. Very convenient timing." But Vinny had seen enough death to recognize the difference between natural causes and assistance. No foam at the lips, no convulsions, just the quiet shutdown of a man whose ticker had been helped along by something fast-acting and undetectable. The kind of thing that left coroners writing cardiac arrest on death certificates without asking uncomfortable questions. "You killed him." "I killed no one, Mr. Torino. Henri's conscience did that." Chen smoothed her skirt with practiced precision. Amazing how guilt can literally stop a man's heart. All those years of keeping secrets, watching friends die, wondering if he could have done something different. Tony Carpelli backed toward the door, his face the color of old concrete. "You said nobody else had to die. You said if I brought Vinny here, that would be enough. And it is enough. For now." Chen's smile held all the warmth of January wind off Lake Michigan. "But, Mr. Carpelli, surely you don't expect to simply walk away from this? Not after 30 years of silence about what really happened that night." The sound that came from Tony's throat was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "I was just muscle. I didn't know about any conspiracy, any files. I thought Mickey was trying to poison the old man, same as everyone else. Everyone except Vincent." Chen turned back to Vinny with renewed interest. "Because deep down, you knew your brother wasn't capable of murder, didn't you? That's why you've spent 30 years drinking yourself to sleep. Not because you killed a traitor, but because you killed an innocent man." The words hit like bullets, each one finding its mark in the soft places where Vinny had buried his doubts. All those nights when whiskey couldn't drown the memory of Mickey's face in that final second, not anger or hatred, but heartbreak. The look of a man watching his brother choose the wrong side of history. "Mickey always was the smart one," Vinny whispered. "Even as kids, he could see angles I missed. When the neighborhood started changing, when the old families were getting squeezed out, Mickey saw it coming years before the rest of us. Smart enough to know the outfit's days were numbered. Smart enough to make a deal with the only people who could protect his brother from what was coming." Chen moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. The Bureau offered him a new identity for both of you. Clean papers, a fresh start somewhere Giancana's paranoia couldn't reach. Vinny closed his eyes, remembering that morning in March when Mickey had seemed different. Jittery, excited, like a man sitting on news too big to contain. The way he'd kept checking his watch, mentioning a job interview that didn't quite make sense. Plans for the future that seemed too ambitious for a bartender's salary. He was going to tell me that night, at the Copa, after he got you away from Giancana's table, away from the real killers who were waiting for their chance. Chen's voice carried a note of something that might have been genuine regret. Your brother spent weeks setting up that extraction. Federal marshals positioned outside, new identities waiting, a safe house in Oregon where you could have lived out your lives in peace. The crushing weight of lost possibilities pressed down on Vinny like a collapsed building. 30 years of self-imposed exile, 30 years of carrying guilt that belonged to other people, 30 years of running from a truth that might have set him free. Then why are you here? He asked. If Mickey's dead, if the files are gone, what's left to clean up? Chen's smile widened, and for the first time since she'd walked through his door, Vinny saw something genuine in her expression. Not warmth or sympathy, but satisfaction. The look of a hunter who'd finally cornered her prey. Because Mickey Torino was smarter than any of us gave him credit for. Those files he gave you, they were copies. Insurance, like your friend Tony mentioned. But the originals, the real evidence that could bring down a conspiracy spanning 6 decades, Mickey hid those somewhere else. Tony was shaking his head frantically. No, that's impossible. We searched everything after Mickey died. His apartment, his car, every place he might have. But you didn't search his brother's heart, Chen interrupted. Because Mickey knew Vincent better than Vincent knew himself. Knew exactly where to hide something that would stay safe until the right person came looking. Vinny felt the blood drain from his face as understanding crashed over him like ice water. The confession booth at St. Alphonsus. Mickey's funeral, when Vinny had spent an hour alone with Father Kowalski, pouring out his guilt to a priest who'd listened without judgment. The small wooden box the old priest had pressed into his hands afterward. Mickey's personal effects from his last confession, sealed according to church law until Vinny was ready to receive them. A box that had sat unopened in Vinny's apartment for 30 years. Arrogant bitch, he whispered, and Chen's smile faltered for just a moment. You think you know everything, but you missed the most important part. And what would that be, Mr. Torino? Mickey wasn't protecting the files from Giancana's people. Vinny stood up slowly, feeling pieces clicking into place with the inevitability of a chamber rotating in a loaded gun. He was protecting them from yours. Chen's smile vanished completely, replaced by something cold and predatory. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as she processed Vinny's words, her hand moving almost imperceptibly toward the bulge beneath her jacket. Explain. Mickey figured it out before anyone else did, Vinny said, his voice gaining strength as 30 years of puzzle pieces finally locked into place. The outfit wasn't the real enemy, you people were. The same federal agents who were supposed to be protecting him were the ones who wanted him dead. Tony Carpelli had gone completely still by the door, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and dawning comprehension. That's impossible. Mickey was working with the feds. He told you what they wanted him to tell you. Vinny cut him off. Because Mickey knew the walls had ears, knew every conversation was being recorded, every meeting monitored. But he also knew something else. He looked directly at Chen, saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. He knew some of those federal agents were dirty. The sound of Henri's blood pooling beneath his body seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Outside, car engines continued running, Chen's people waiting for orders that might never come. Your brother was a bartender and small-time criminal, Chen said. But her voice had lost its earlier confidence. What could he possibly have uncovered that experienced agents missed? Names, Vinny said simply. Bank accounts, meeting places, all the little details that important people thought were beneath notice. He began moving slowly toward the bar, each step calculated to look casual while bringing him closer to the shotgun he kept hidden beneath the register. See, Mickey worked at 3 different establishments over 2 years. The Copa, sure, but also a private club in Georgetown when he visited his army buddy, and a hotel bar in Miami where he picked up weekend shifts. Chen's hand was definitely on her weapon now, but she hadn't drawn yet. Professional training warring with the need to hear what came next. Mickey served drinks to a lot of powerful men who thought bartenders were invisible, Vinny continued. Congressmen, CIA officers, mob lawyers, and sometimes those men met in combinations that didn't make sense unless you knew they were all working for the same team. The implications hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Tony Carpelli sank against the doorframe, his face gray with understanding. Jesus Christ, Vin. You're saying the government was in bed with Giancana? Not the government, Vinny corrected. Parts of it. Enough to matter. He was almost to the bar now, close enough to smell the whiskey he'd spilled earlier mixing with Henri's blood. Mickey documented everything. Names, dates, photographs when he could manage it. 2 years of building a case that would have brought down half of Washington. And then he got scared, Chen said, but her voice carried a tremor now. Realized he was in over his head. Tried to make a deal. No. Vinny's hand brushed the edge of the bar, fingertips touching familiar wood grain worn smooth by decades of elbows and spilled drinks. Mickey realized the people he'd been reporting to were the same ones he'd been investigating. The Bureau wasn't trying to save him from Giancana. They were trying to silence him before he could expose their operation. The truth sat between them like an unexploded bomb. Chen's breathing had changed, becoming shallow and controlled. Professional mask slipping to reveal something desperate underneath. Where are the files, Vincent? Safe. He thought about Father Kowalski's wooden box, hidden behind 30 years of accumulated guilt in his bedroom closet. Everything Mickey had died protecting, waiting for someone with the courage to look. Safer than you'll ever get your hands on them. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Chen said, desperation making her voice sharp. Those files contain information that could destabilize, could expose the truth, Vinny interrupted. Could show the world exactly how deep this conspiracy goes, how many people died to protect your secrets. Chen drew her weapon in one smooth motion, the black metal catching fluorescent light from the beer signs. I can't let you leave this room, Mr. Torino. You have to understand that. But Vinny was already moving, muscle memory from a younger, more dangerous life taking over. His hand found the shotgun's familiar weight, bringing it up and around as Chen's finger tightened on her trigger. Time slowed to crystalline clarity. The sound of Tony screaming, the flash of muzzle fire, the thunder of 2 weapons firing simultaneously in the confined space of Torino's bar. And underneath it all, the whisper-soft sound of something breaking, not glass this time, but the 30-year silence that had kept Mickey's truth buried. The killing had finally begun, but for the first time since 1963, Vincent Torino knew which side he was really fighting for. The shotgun's roar filled the world, drowning out everything except the ringing in Vinny's ears and the wet sound of Chen's body hitting the floor. Her weapon had fired wild, the bullet punching through the ceiling and raining down plaster dust like snow on Christmas morning. Tony Carpelli was pressed against the door, mouth open in a silent scream, his face spattered with blood that wasn't his own. The fluorescent beer signs continued their endless dance of color across walls now decorated with evidence of violence. Chen wasn't dead, but she was close. The shotgun blast had caught her in the chest, and dark blood bubbled at the corners of her mouth as she tried to speak. Her eyes found Vinny's, still calculating even as the light began to fade. You don't know, she whispered. How many? There are. Enough, Vinny said, kneeling beside her with the same gentleness he'd shown Henri. Tell me about Mickey's last night. Tell me the truth. Chen's smile was painted in blood now, but it still held traces of that professional coldness. He figured it out. Too late. Tried to warn you. The words came in fragments, each one bought with visible effort. Outside, car engines were shutting off one by one. Chen's people, hearing the gunfire, preparing for whatever came next. The Copa wasn't random, she continued. Mickey knew. They were coming for both of you. The drink was supposed to make Giancana sick, get him out. Vinny felt 30 years of guilt shifting inside his chest. old wounds tearing open to reveal something even more painful underneath. He was trying to save all of us. Stupid boy. Blood ran down Chen's chin like a crimson river. Thought he could outsmart decades of careful work. Whose work? Vinny demanded. But Chen's eyes were already going glassy, her breathing reduced to shallow gasps that sounded like autumn leaves scraping against concrete. The front door exploded inward, wood splintering as three men in dark suits poured through the opening. Federal agents or private contractors. At this point, the distinction seemed meaningless. They moved with practiced efficiency, weapons drawn, spreading out to cover the room's angles. But they stopped when they saw Chen's body, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Without her voice giving orders, they were just well-trained men in an impossible situation. "Drop the weapon," the lead agent commanded, but his voice lacked conviction. Behind him, his partners shifted nervously, clearly unsure how to handle the death of their handler. Vinny set the shotgun on the bar with deliberate care, his movements slow and unthreatening. "She killed Henri. I killed her. Tony's just an innocent bystander who got caught in the middle of something bigger than all of us." "That's not—" Tony started to protest, then seemed to realize the gift he was being offered. "Yeah, that's right, I don't know nothing about nothing." The lead agent looked around the room. Two bodies, blood pooling on cracked linoleum, an old man with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much death to be impressed by three more guns pointed in his direction. "Where are the files?" he asked, but the question came out sounding more like a plea than a demand. "Gone," Vinny lied smoothly. "Mickey hid them somewhere. Your people will never find them." Chen died before she could tell me where. It was a calculated gamble, based on 30 years of reading faces across a bar. These men were followers, not leaders. Without Chen's guidance, they were operating blind, trying to salvage a mission that had already gone sideways. The agents exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. The kind of look that said they were reconsidering their options, weighing the cost of a massacre against the value of secrets that might already be beyond their reach. "This doesn't end here," the lead agent finally said, but he was already backing toward the door. "We'll be watching." "You do that," Vinny replied. "But remember, Mickey Torino was smarter than all of you put together. Whatever insurance he left behind, it's still out there, still waiting for the right moment to come to light." The agents retreated like shadows dissolving at dawn, leaving behind only the smell of cordite and the weight of unfinished business. Their engines started up again, but this time the sound was retreat, not preparation. Tony slumped against the doorframe, his legs finally giving out. "Christ, Vin, what happens now?" Vinny looked around his bar, the place that had been sanctuary and prison for 30 years. Henri's body lay where it had fallen, while Chen's blood slowly spread across floorboards that had absorbed decades of spilled drinks and small confessions. "Now we bury our dead," he said quietly. "And then we decide what to do with the truth." Outside, the morning sun was finally breaking through Chicago's perpetual cloud cover, sending long shafts of golden light through windows that hadn't been clean in years. For the first time since 1963, Vincent Torino felt like he could breathe. The silence that followed was different from any quiet Vinny had known in 30 years. Not the hollow emptiness of a closed bar after last call, but something fuller. The kind of peace that comes after a storm has finally blown itself out. He stood among the bodies and blood, watching dust motes dance in the golden morning light, and felt something that might have been absolution settling into his bones. The weight he'd carried since 1963 hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed from guilt into grief, from self-hatred into simple, honest sadness for all the lives that might have been. "We need to call someone," Tony said eventually, his voice hoarse from shock. "Police, ambulance, somebody." "Yeah." Vinny moved behind the bar one last time, his hands finding the familiar rhythm of cleaning, wiping down surfaces that would never be clean again, straightening bottles that would never be poured. In a minute. The wooden box waited in his apartment upstairs, Mickey's final gift wrapped in 3 decades of church-sanctified silence, whatever secrets his brother had died protecting. Whatever truths Chen's people had killed to suppress, they belonged to the world now, not to Vincent Torino. But first, he needed to say goodbye. He pulled out a glass, the good crystal he'd saved for special occasions that never came, and poured 2 fingers of Irish whiskey. The bottle was nearly empty, its amber contents catching the light like liquid fire. He raised the glass toward Henri's body, toward Chen's still form, toward the ghost of his brother that had haunted this place for longer than either of them had deserved. "To Mickey Torino," he said aloud, "who is smarter than all of us, who loved his brother enough to die trying to save him." The whiskey burned going down, but it was a clean burn now. No longer medicine for wounds that wouldn't heal, but a simple toast to the dead. Tony watched from the doorway, understanding without words that this was Vinny's moment to close a book that had been open too long. The morning sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, transforming the scene of violence into something almost beautiful. What was he really like? Tony asked quietly. "Your brother." Before all this, Vinny smiled, and it was the first genuine smile his face had worn in decades. Mickey? Mickey was the kind of kid who'd fight anyone who picked on the neighborhood strays, used to bring home broken birds, try to nurse them back to health in shoeboxes lined with his mother's good towels. He could see Mickey clearly now, not the dead federal agent or the martyred saint, but the 10-year-old boy who'd cried when their father threw out a stray cat Mickey had been feeding. The teenager who'd worked 3 jobs to help pay for their mother's medicine. The young man who'd enlisted not for glory or adventure, but because the signing bonus meant Vinny could finish high school instead of dropping out to work. "He always was protecting people," Vinny continued. "Guess that never changed, even when protecting people meant becoming someone else entirely." The sound of sirens was growing closer now. Tony must have made the call while Vinny was lost in memory. Soon this place would be flooded with investigators and crime scene technicians, turning his sanctuary into evidence. The truth about Henri and Chen would come out in reports and testimony, but the deeper truths would remain hidden until Vinny decided the world was ready for them. "You going to be okay?" Tony asked, genuine concern in his voice. Vinny looked around the bar one last time, really looked, not with the eyes of a man trapped by his past, but with the vision of someone finally free to choose his future. The bullet holes and bloodstains would fade with time, but the memories worth keeping would remain. "Yeah," he said, and meant it. "For the first time in 30 years, I think I'm going to be just fine." The sirens were right outside now, red and blue lights painting the windows in familiar patterns. But Vinny wasn't afraid anymore. He'd spent 3 decades running from the sound of breaking glass, from the memory of a choice made in desperate ignorance. Now he knew the truth. Mickey hadn't been reaching for poison that night. He'd been reaching for salvation, for both of them. The brother Vinny had killed trying to protect a monster had actually died trying to protect the only family he'd ever loved. It was a tragedy worthy of Shakespeare, beautiful and terrible in its perfect, pointless symmetry. But tragedies, Vinny had learned, could still have meaning. Mickey's death had led to this moment, to this choice, to this chance for truth to finally surface after decades buried in Chicago soil. As the first officers pushed through his broken door, Vincent Torino felt something he hadn't experienced since he was young enough to believe the world might still make sense: hope.